We are back at it. Another, college football playoff rankings in the books, and we're here to discuss it, dissect it, tell you why Ohio State should be number one, all that and then some. I'm Chris Drew from Menace of Sports. That's my guy Ron from Best Damn Media. Ron, what is good?
I'm doing pretty good right now, but man, my Buckeyes fall to number 2, so I'm a little down right now. I've been starting these shows with feeling great because we're the number 1 team in the country. Not so much anymore. The Buckeyes get passed by the Georgia Bulldogs, who ascend to number 1 in the college football playoff rankings, but I think deservedly so. We talked about this on our pregame show before the slate of games this Saturday, and you asked, does Georgia leapfrog Ohio State with a win this week? And I said, I thought they do. I thought these past 2 weeks of wins over Ole Miss and Missouri were super impressive. You said it a couple weeks ago on our first show about the college football rankings. It feels like putting Ohio State at 1 was setting up for Georgia to pass them in a few weeks with the schedule that they had upcoming, and that's exactly what we saw. So I can't say that we are surprised, and I do think the Bulldogs did deserve to jump the Buckeyes, but man, it does stink to see the Buckeyes lose that number 1 designation.
Yeah, bro. What does Micah Parsons say? I'm sick. I'm sick to my stomach. It's felt like the worst of both worlds, right? Because, Georgia being number 2, you know how Kirby is. Kirby will find a way to put the ultimate chip on this team's shoulder, and now he had the help seeing Ohio State ranked 1. Ended up kind of flipping and being, flipping at some point. And then, of course, they get the resume builders, right? Ole Miss, to me, was ranked appropriately for where they were, and I was hoping for them to create chaos. They got absolutely boat raced. And then Mizzou, who I'm not sure is the number 9, is the 9th best team in the nation, but they got the bump as well, kind of giving Georgia that resume to definitely pass Ohio State. But if you're Ohio State, you can't be mad, right? Number 2 team in the country, you have your whole season in front of you on November 25th. This is the chance to go. I do want to run down the top 7, though, and we'll take it team by team just so we can kind of dissect it and pull things apart.
7, we got to start at 8. I think the best team in the country is ranked 8.
You know what? Why not? Starting with Bama at 8, I think it's severely too low for them. I think Jalen Milroe is truly a top 6 quarterback in the entire nation. He's exciting to watch. To me, I was telling you, and I told everybody, he's like Braxton Miller plus 10 pounds maybe and playing on Alabama. That's the version of this. Bama is maybe 2014 Ohio State with Braxton Miller. And that should terrify people. That terrifies me, terrifies you, I would think. Them at number 8 feels low, but I also don't know if you can rank them higher than that. Thoughts on Nick Saban's Bama team being 8?
I feel like the committee's sending a message right now with Bama at 8 telling you that they are not passing Texas unless Texas loses. And I feel like that is a roadblock, and despite how good Alabama's playing, because if eye test truly mattered and you were looking, when they said these college football rankings came out, they were going to put the 4 best teams in, and that's what they were looking to do. With Alabama being at 8, it seems like they have criteria that they're not willing to overlook, and that head-to-head matchup seems to be a roadblock for Alabama that's going to keep them on the outside looking in, regardless of how good they look each week on the field. I think Texas is a roadblock that they can't overcome unless Texas falls.
Honestly, I love that Bama's at 8 because as an Ohio State guy, that's the team I don't want to see. But also, this is just early hypocrisy from the committee, because how are you going to use eye test with Oregon but not with Bama? Walk me through that. How do you use eye test with one but not with the other?
I think that's the committee being the committee, because that's something that's been discussed about this whole rankings this season, is that they've been inconsistent in applying different metrics to each team. And it seems like they have a different criteria for each team as far as why they're ranked where they're ranked. We haven't really seen consistency among these rankings as far as why certain teams are ahead of each other. We were talking about who has potentially the best resume in the country right before the show started, and we're looking through Washington's schedule, and we're like, how isn't Washington the number 1 team in the country? A win over Oregon, a win over USC, a win over Utah.
And a win over Arizona, who people don't realize ranked top 20 in the entire country per the committee.
Exactly. And we're talking about 3 ranked wins, and then your best win is against the former Heisman winner. They have a super impressive resume, and they're on the outside looking in as an undefeated team. It's kind of crazy what standards that they're using for these rankings, because it really doesn't make sense when you're looking at these resumes, when you're looking at eye test. I mean, we talked about it, best resume and best quarterback potentially. When you're looking at these top teams, it's kind of hard to understand why Washington's on the outside looking in right now.
Facts. And if you look at the top 8, you go Bama 8, Texas 7, Oregon 6, Washington 5, Florida State 4, Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia. The team that's ranked number 6 has the 8th best win out of everybody there. Like the Bama win over Ole Miss is definitely better than any Oregon win. The Texas win over Bama, that's better than any Oregon win. Obviously, Washington beat Oregon. That's better than any Oregon win. And I mean, I could go on and on and on. It's just wild that, Bama, who usually gets the benefit of the eye test, isn't getting the benefit. And the team getting the benefit of the eye test, even though they lost to Washington, is number 6 Oregon. I think Texas should be ranked ahead of them as well, even though neutral site-wise, maybe I would pick Oregon to win that game. But again, eye test versus resume versus most deserved versus all of it. I'm glad that Ohio State's not a one-loss team and they control their own destiny, because that 6 through 8 is all mucked up and really not where you want to be.
Absolutely. You can't trust the committee to do the right thing if you're looking to get in on merit of being the best team. You brought up best win. I think that brings us to our first poll. I want to ask you, who has the best win in the country? On the poll, I have OSU and UM over Penn State. I feel like that's a shared vote for that one, because I feel like both teams look very similar against that team, and it looks like to be their top opponent on their resume so far. You have Texas over Alabama, Georgia over Missouri, or Washington over Oregon.
So I was conflicted on this one. I think I was between two. I think the Penn State wins that Ohio State and Michigan were able to get were so massive because of the style they did it in, right? Like, it was suffocating. It was clear that Ohio State and Michigan were the best team all the way throughout the game. No one will ever question that. But on paper, Washington has the best win. The issue with the Washington win is that everybody who watched the game felt like Oregon was the better team and Washington got lucky. And so that doesn't that taint that win a little bit?
Absolutely. And I feel like that it could be the only explanation for why they're on the outside looking in. If the committee feels like Washington got away with one and they should have lost there. And that, I mean, honestly, that could be the only justification after you look at the offensive output that they have, the quarterback that they have, and the resume thus far. And the committee must be looking at that game and saying, you guys got away with one. I don't respect that win. I don't feel like you should have won that game. And Dan Lanning did you guys a favor.
Yeah. But Dan Lanning, like, coaching is also part of the game. So, like, if Dan Lanning was, botched that game and kind of threw away the better performance, I think they should be punished too. I really do think Texas should be ranked ahead of Oregon. And honestly, it should be kind of Oregon right there with Bama that we could talk about. Now, Bama, in a really interesting case, if they win the SEC title game, is that going to be enough to leap them all the way into the top 4?
No,
I don't think so either. But
I think Texas is a roadblock, and I think they're sending a message each week that as long as Texas wins out, Alabama will not move ahead of them. And I've heard this argument multiple times in different venues about why even play the games? If you're going to ignore a head-to-head matchup and say, well, I think Alabama's a better team, then why not just put Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State in the playoffs every year, and then we can fight for the last spot and just be a wild card? Like, you play the games for a reason, and if you're not going to respect that head-to-head matchup, what is the incentive for any of these teams to schedule these out-of-conference games with top opponents if you're not even going to get the respect for them if the logo or the play at the end of the season trumps your resume?
No, I 100% agree. And then my other point is, people forget it's not always the best team that wins these championships across any sport. It's the team that gets the hottest at the right time. It's always been that way. Like, the best teams don't always win, and we've seen it. I mean, prime example going way back, right? The Giants were not a better team than the Patriots. They were not.
I was going to say, you're a Giants fan. You should know all about winning championships you guys don't deserve.
I done seen it before. Sometimes the better teams don't always win, right? Sometimes the best teams don't win. And I'll contend, last year, I think Michigan was probably a better team than TCU. TCU won the game. Sometimes the better teams don't always win. So that's why the games do matter, and kind of being there is super important. I wanted to ask you about the number 9 team in the country, because the reason Ohio State kind of lost that number 1 overall spot was because the last 2 weeks, Georgia beat Mizzou and Ole Miss. Both considered quality wins. And then Mizzou got a win and got bumped all the way up to number 9 in the country. Was that done to justify even more the Georgia to number 1?
I think so. I do respect that win, definitely significantly more than the Ole Miss win. I feel like that's a little bit of an overrated win, but I do think Missouri is a respectable win. We talk about this in years past that we would see the ratings bumps when teams were getting ready to play Alabama. And
the Bama bump.
The Bama bump. Like, hey, we got a primetime game against Alabama. We got to move them up in the rankings. And I feel like we're seeing that with Georgia teams now. And I think the Missouri win the Missouri team represents that as number 9 as a top 10 win. But you did ask me during the college football pregame show, do I think that Missouri win's a better win than the Penn State win? And I do. And I do think they are deserving of jumping to that number 1 spot because I do think that Missouri team is better than what we've seen out of Penn State so far this year.
You know, I love Missouri, bro. Like, I love Brady Cook.
Mookie Cooper, come on, former Buckeye.
Nah, forget Mookie. Brady Cook is insane. Bro is so nice at the game. That's kind of, I wish he was at Ohio State to keep it honest. Now, I want to ask you in the chat because I think that number 1 spot really, really matters. And it does concern me just a little bit why I said I'm sick. I'm sick to my stomach that it's no longer Ohio State, because before I felt like Ohio State could lose to Michigan. And if they did, they would still have a really good shot to make the playoffs. Now that they're number 2, I'm not sure that's the case. And with Georgia, them being number 1, they might be able to lose to Bama and still make the playoffs.
Yeah, after what we've seen from Michigan this year with their lackluster resume, they really didn't beat the brakes off of Penn State. They had a very similar output to Ohio State. I don't think the Big Ten has shown enough to be deserving of 2 teams into the college football playoffs. As an Ohio State fan, and what was my big joke during the offseason? I joked all offseason I would put out fake college football playoff rankings, way too early college football rankings, and I'd put 3 Big Ten teams in: Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan. And I just have not been super impressed with the output from, and we don't have any out-of-conference wins. Penn State hasn't done anything in the non-conference. Michigan hasn't done anything in the non-conference to prove what the Big Ten has done this year. So I don't think the Big Ten is deserving of 2 teams. And while I would love the Buckeyes to have that in their back pocket and be able to potentially lose that game, as much as it would sicken me to lose that game, but I would still want them to be able to get in the playoffs. I don't think if they lose to that team up north that they're deserving of a playoff spot.
All right, here's where it gets interesting. Here's where I struggle with the word best, right? If Ohio State is indeed the 2nd best team in the country, and they win a very, very close game against Michigan, who's supposedly the 3rd best team in the country, isn't that how it's supposed to happen?
Yes.
So why would you then slide Michigan? If we thought they were the 3rd best team in the country and they played very, very close to Ohio State and lost like they're supposed to per the committee, why would you bounce them out of the top 5? Top 4?
Because we just said Washington has the best resume and they're at 5.
They do. They do. So have them.
That's why. And I feel like that's another reason why the committee feels so comfortable leaving them on the outside looking in. I feel like what we saw this week is with that slide is the committee telling us if there's 4 undefeated teams, they're going. And they feel like since Ohio State and Michigan have to play, it's going to sort itself out.
Yeah, it'll have to sort itself out. Excuse me. I want to talk about Michigan for a second because Michigan did win over Penn State in a game that was just about as fascinating as it gets. You had coaches crying after the games like Harbaugh died. You had Blake Corum leaking in 4K. It was kind of bizarre. And you had a quarterback who was supposed to be a Heisman candidate throw for only 60 yards. All of this in the middle of what has been the biggest cheating scandal, at least in recent memory, allegedly. While we're here, I want your thoughts on Michigan, bro, because while Michigan did beat Penn State, I don't think they were very dominant, if that makes sense. Or I don't think they were traditionally dominant. And I think there are some red flags with that offense, especially J.J. McCarthy.
If I'm James Franklin, I feel so disrespected after this game.
Got to.
This is now 2 years in a row. Well, first you send your interim coach to come in to my home stadium, beat me. Not only do you beat me, you run the ball 32 straight times to end the game. The lack of respect that they have for Penn State, because this is now 2 years in a row where they said, we are going to show up to play you and mush you. Like, we do not care. We're going to just push you around because we are the more physical team. They put up over 300 rushing yards last year, and then they close out the game this year with 32 straight rushes. Clearly, Michigan feels like they have Penn State's number in the running game, and to see the performance that they put on, James Franklin has to be so disappointed.
Has to be disappointed. I know that defense is beat up because they were out there for so much. I mean, it was 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. I mean, that game ended a lot of things. On the Michigan side, it ended J.J. McCarthy's Heisman push. It's officially over. On the other side, it ended Mike Yurcich's time at Penn State. He was officially, you're fired. Got him out of there. And it was really an interesting look. And honestly, Sherrone Moore, you know, my guy Zach had a good point. It looked like Sherrone Moore was crying after the game because he felt guilty for what he got Jim Harbaugh into. I thought that was definitely eye-opening. But in terms of this smash mouth style football, like our guy Jay Moore saying in the chat, is that sustainable to win a championship? Is that sustainable to beat Ohio State? Because I don't think a quarterback can not throw the ball the entire second half and beat Ohio State, if I'm being honest.
Here's my concern. I had that same thought last year after they ran the ball all over Penn State. And I said, well, they're not going to do that against Ohio State. And then they did it against Ohio State.
But last year was a lot of gashing runs against Penn State. They didn't start gashing them till run number 22, it felt like.
That's true. I just worry that Michigan could show up and just play Michigan football, and if Ohio State struggles on offense, that they could still get it done. And despite their struggles and lack of pass game, I've seen JJ make things happen on the run, and that's something that does concern me against this offense. Against the Ohio State defense. The Ohio State defense has been so good at limiting the big plays. I worry about J.J. McCarthy on third down. I texted you during that game. I was like, this dude on third down is infuriating, because if there's not a guy open, he's going to make it happen with his legs and run for the first down or run long enough until someone gets open. And that does worry me against the Buckeyes. So while I wasn't that impressed with their performance against Penn State, it didn't disappoint me to the point that I think that they're going to be able to beat the Buckeyes.
Bro,
or that the Buckeyes won't be able to beat them.
Bro, I don't think Michigan can play that way and win. I really don't.
But here's my concern. With Lathan Ransom potentially out and Tommy Eichenberg still injured, are they able to take advantage of Ohio State in the run game? Because Ohio State has had some of the longer runs that they've seen all season in the past few weeks since they've had these injuries. So that is my hesitancy there.
Yeah, they're definitely a unique team. And I do want to circle back to Ohio State, but I do want to give some thoughts to the number one team, Georgia, who were used to playing that kind of style of smash mouth football. They've kind of pivoted away from that in recent time. Carson Beck, they've kind of allowed him to open things up. They're the number one team. You know, the belief is that they have kind of mastered the balance between offensive efficiency, smash mouth football, and defense in order to win titles. I don't think there's any question here, but I wanted to ask you, is there anything that kind of is a red flag or should be a red flag for the Georgia fan base to where maybe their team isn't built like last year's team?
No. I mean, when's the last time they've seen their team lose? You know what I mean? They've won back-to-back championships. If I was a Georgia fan, I'd be waking up every morning assuming that I'm about to see my third championship, because it's been so long since I watched a college football season where my team wasn't winning a national championship. And I don't think they've seen anything this year, especially in the national landscape, that should scare them away from their hopes of a third championship.
Yeah, I would agree. They're a fascinating team. They're not as good as the last two teams, and I think that it's good that there is no runaway dominant team in college football this year. But in a vacuum, like they've got the formula, and that is the team that honestly, like on my checklist, I would like Ohio State to beat Michigan, and then I would like Ohio State to get a second crack at Georgia, because this is the most susceptible I've seen the Georgia team taking a loss here in the last couple of years, in my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely think this is the least talent. I mean, it's a super talented team, but it's nowhere near as talented as the teams that we've seen in the past, and definitely nowhere near the caliber of defenses that we've seen in the past. If the Buckeyes have a chance at knocking off the Bulldogs, I think this would be the year to get it done.
Yeah, that is a fact. Florida State sitting there at number 4. I think they're going to win out, but I don't think they deserve to be that team. That's the 4th team. I think Washington is better, but can Florida State, do they play good enough defense, or is their offense good enough to be the team that potentially can beat a Georgia of the world?
There is a Miami civil war going on right now about who should be their quarterback. And I don't know if any of them are good options at this point. And Florida State only beat them by 7.
Yeah.
I don't know. We were just going through the Florida State schedule and we're like, well, they got a decent win over Duke. And it's like, well, Duke's not ranked anymore.
I think their win week 1 over LSU is their best one. But honestly, if they were to play right now on neutral side, I think LSU would beat them.
I think LSU would blur them right now. And another win that looked impressive at the time, kind of, Clemson. But, I mean, what is Clemson at this point?
Barely above 500. Regular, celebrating after beating Georgia Tech. Something that didn't think I would see.
Absolutely. I feel like this is typical ACC. I think this is a down year for the ACC, and Florida State's taking advantage of it right now. And if they handle business, they're gonna reap the benefits of it.
All right. Well, their out west counterpart, I'll call them, just with a better resume. Washington. Are they the team outside of Bama, outside of the top 4, that has the best chance to be able to knock off a Georgia?
I think so, because one of the reasons why people were so confident about Ohio State going up against the Bulldogs last year is that they had the elite athletes on the edge to challenge them. And I think with Michael Penix being a Heisman caliber quarterback, I think he presents like the CJ Stroud factor of, yes, this may be an outmatched team, but they might just get outskilled by the skilled talent on the outside. And I think Michael Penix and the wide receivers at Washington would be able to take advantage of Georgia, similar to the way that we saw CJ Stroud have success last year.
They put such extreme stress on defenses because Rome Odunze is able to stretch the field. Michael Penix loves the deep ball. And the Polk kid, no one wants to talk about, would be wide receiver 1 at 90% of the schools in the country. They should be a terrifying matchup. And if you do make one coaching mistake, like we saw Oregon make and Dan Lanning make, 2 plays, 6. Like
the chat is not buying Washington's defense, so we got to talk about it. And we were just going through the Washington schedule, and I'm like, man, Cal put up 32 on them, Oregon 33, Stanford 33, USC 42, Utah 28. Chris Drew, your response was, well, those teams score a lot.
They do. They are 2021 Ohio State.
That's comparison.
That's what they are.
That defense was so bad.
They were so bad. They were bad, and then they made you think they were good, but they had the receivers. Like they had what? That was the year where you had Olave, Garrett Wilson, and JSN. Like that is what Washington is.
Buckeye fans convincing themselves that defense was getting better when there was obvious flaws week in and week out. It was like the craziest cope I've ever seen.
Craziest cope. But this year, no coping required for the Ohio State defense because they are locked. They are loaded. We got him, Knowles. We got the gang. Let's talk about it. Ohio State at this point, number 2. They'll have a chance. They'll have a crack at Michigan. Marvin Harrison Jr. and Kyle McCord are hitting their stride. What is your confidence level with them being truly a championship caliber team?
I got on here last week and I said, I don't think this team is truly a national championship contender unless the quarterback play improves. I don't know if the quarterback play improved or if the defensive opponent was just that bad, but I'm ready to go with it and believe in Hellcat McCord. Kyle McCord came out and gave his best performance after some people thought that his performance the week before wasn't that bad. I thought it was one of his worst performances of the season.
Yeah.
To see him level up and perform exactly how we expected him to perform against a defense like that and go out there and take advantage of a bad defense. I thought that's exactly what Buckeye fans needed to see going into the game against the team up north, and hopefully he can keep that rolling. If he's able to sustain that momentum against Minnesota this week, I think Buckeye fans should be confident about the trajectory of this team and their chances to win a national championship.
You know, it's fascinating, Ron. The more this picture clears up, it looks like Ohio State could get to the Natty and play in a Natty without having to face a dynamic offense the entire way through. And that just means everything.
We had a phrase during the offseason that we talked about, and we wouldn't say it in public, but every time we got off the phone, we would be like, SNS. What does SNS stand for?
Sneaky Natty season. It felt like that from the jump. I was concerned early with the quarterback play, but it feels like they're going to be able to sneak their way to a Natty with this more SEC-style team, a team that is really built to go body blow for body blow, and a team that in the fourth quarter can get a stop when you need a stop.
We have talked about there being that lack of Death Star team in college football right now. Ohio State has this great defense, but we haven't seen the offensive firepower that we've seen in years past. But it just feels like this Ohio State offense is just waiting to put it all together. Marvin Harrison Jr. is clicking right now. Travion Henderson looks like the best he's ever had in his entire career. Cade Stover is back healthy, and that's been Kyle's safety blanket all year. The offensive line is run blocking like a way that we haven't seen them do all year. If Kyle can completely put it together and Emeka Egbuka starts playing like the first round wide receiver that we believe him to be, this team could turn into the Death Star team that no one saw coming in 2023.
Mm-hmm. They're not as flashy. They don't, it's not super pretty always, but it feels like a Floyd Mayweather fight. I'm not gonna deny I don't have Roy Jones power, but I'm going to drag you into deep waters and watch you swing and miss again and again and again, and I'm going to outpoint you. That is what this Ohio State team feels like. I am concerned at a couple places, but it really feels wrong. Like if they beat Michigan, they're likely the number one team going into championship weekend, right?
I think so. You have to. I mean, if Ohio State beats Michigan, that turns into the best win in the country, correct?
Yeah, correct. And and then you wouldn't elevate Georgia number one because the Bama win you're telling us isn't as good as the Michigan win.
You have the Michigan win. You'll have the Penn State, and you'll have the conference championship as well to add on top of that. I think the Buckeyes have put together a resume. We have one final poll here that I want to ask you about. Who had the better win against Penn State while we're talking about best wins, Ohio State or Michigan? It's probably the most likely comparison point between Ohio State and Michigan right now. So what were your thoughts on how Michigan performed at Penn State, and who do you think got the better win? Because, I mean, Ohio State won by 3, Michigan won by 4, something like that?
What, what, Ohio State, Michigan versus Penn State?
Yes.
It was like by 8 and by 9.
8 and 9, I'm sorry. 1 point difference.
Yeah, 1 point difference. Honestly, bro, I was probably going to catch some flack, but I actually watch the games. I think Ohio State looked better against Penn State than Michigan did, if that makes sense. I know that that Michigan won by 1 point more, but also I watched Penn State score a garbage time touchdown at the very, very end to kind of make that look closer because Ohio State was up by 2 scores kind of the whole way through. And Ohio State also was able to throw the ball and protect their like the Michigan tackles look like the worst I'd ever seen. Like I sat there and was like, oh my goodness, Josh Fryer and Simmons would both start for Michigan today in pass pro. That's how bad the Michigan tackles were. So the fact that I thought Ohio State was able to be more than just one dimensional was important, and the way they were able to kind of get their playmakers out in space, I thought was better too. So honestly, and here we go, like. We didn't know Penn State signs. So, yeah, like that was right. Like the Ohio State win over Penn State was better. Allegedly, right? Right?
Exactly, man. It was definitely an impressive win for the Buckeyes. I know Michigan did it on the road, but I think the Buckeyes were super impressive in that performance. And I can't believe that we are here. It feels like we've talked every week about appreciating these wins and appreciating each Saturday because there's so few of them. There are 11 days until the Team Up North game. The Buckeyes have 2 regular season games remaining. The college football season has just flown by. We have had a great time with you guys on Bleacher Report this season and can't wait to keep doing this with you guys the rest of the year. The Buckeyes are number 2 in the country. It stinks that they're not number 1, but I will take it. They are still a playoff contender and in control of their destiny. Chris Drew, let the people know where they could find you.
Bro, you can find me on the Menace of Sports channel every single weekday talking about how I've convinced myself, Ron, that Ohio State's going to beat Michigan by double digits. Like, I'm on wax. It's done. Done deal. Tonight. Honestly, you can find me with Ron here talking to Ohio State and college football ball whenever. So,
if you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter at 2Ts. It's 2_TEES. You can find me on the Best Damn Media YouTube Monday through Friday for the Buckeye Roast every morning at 8 a.m. with my guy Q. Saturday mornings for the Best Damn College Football pregame show with Chris Drew, and the flagship Buckeye BS on Sundays with my guys Mike, Cam, and Q, and me and Chris Drew, of course, always here on the Bleacher Report platform, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays for instant reactions. Big shout out to Bleacher Report for having us. Always a great time. Shout out to everyone in the chat. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Go Bucks and OH.